So sometimes I think that we have a tendency to take God's grace for granted. Maybe not all of us, maybe not all the time, but from time to time, most of us can do that. Today, we hear again the Lord's important words from 2 Corinthians chapter 12, spoken for the first time 2,000 years ago to the Apostle Paul. My grace is sufficient for you because my strength is made perfect in your weakness. The Apostle John explained the constancy and the abundance of God's grace as he introduced Christ to the world in his gospel account. In chapter 1 of John's gospel, we read that the Word was with God before the world was created, and that the Word transformed into a human and lived on earth. It says that in verse 1. While Jesus was here, John and the other disciples saw his glory, just as Moses and the Hebrews saw God's glory before them in the Sinai desert. The same glory that represented God's covenant of grace to the Hebrews now represented God's new covenant of grace for all people. Grace was now available to everyone on earth, not just the Jews, because grace was incarnate in Jesus and not in the law. Still, I think when it comes right down to it, we're all a bunch of do-it-yourselfers. I remember when I was 16 years old, I went surfing with some of my buddies. We went north of the pier in Huntington Beach, California, my favorite spot of all times, still to this day, all these years later. I remember one time I was out with them and the riptides were getting bad. In fact, they were dangerous to the point where a lifeguard came out to us and told us all to get in and said, in fact, that if any of us needed help, he'd help us get in. Riptides can be tricky too, because if you try to fight them, if you try to go in perpendicular to the shore, it's not going to work. You kind of almost have to start out parallel and then just sort of slowly slide towards the shore. I knew how to do it, so I waved him off because I knew I could do it. Well, think about it. There's a limit, and I was able to do it that day. It turned out to be a good decision. But think about it. There are so many circumstances where the things that challenge us take us to our limit pretty quickly. Important lesson for us today is to hear those words of the Lord. My grace is sufficient for you because my strength is made perfect in your weakness. Have you ever taken God's grace for granted? Every single time that you think you can do something all by yourself, even if you can, you might want to give that some careful thought, because the Lord wants you and I to know that the grace that comes from Him is sustaining and it is sufficient today and every day. Honestly, that's really what Grace to Go is all about.